All right, so today we are going to go over our study guide. Now, this part here really talks about what a study guide needs to be used for. All right, it helps you summarize, it helps you visualize, and it helps to analyze the information. So today I want you to make sure that you have your study guide open so that you can really add anything that you want to add. And so we should not have games up right now. We should only have our study guide up to be looking at. Okay. Simply making the study guide doesn't really help you do well on the test. You actually need to utilize it. So get on a Zoom call with some of your friends and study the information. Okay. Review it with a parent or another adult in your home. Go over the questions and read them to your dog. Okay. Go through it so that you're hearing yourself actually talking about it. So we're going to go through the information. There are Quizlets links here, a Quizlet link here to help you practice the information so that you are ready for the test, and of course a Kahoot that you can play. All right, so we're going to start now with our information. Okay, does everybody have their study guide open and ready to go? Okay, I'm getting lots of thumbs up and nods. All right, so this is the American Revolution era study guide information. And hopefully you got most of this information, but I should hear typing if there are things you're missing. If you are watching this as a video, feel free to pause it as necessary. Okay, the battles of Lexington and Concord are the very first thing we're going to look at. Now notice what I have in bold. It's known as the shot heard round the world. It's known as the shot heard round the world because it's starting a battle, an actual fighting and shooting battle between the colonists and their mother country. What this means is that other countries around the world are taking note of this and seeing that this shot heard around the world is really happening. So other countries are wondering what's going to happen. How are the colonists going to do? So that's why it's referred to as that. Okay, it is outside of the city of Boston where this happens. Originally, what was happening was that the British troops were going to take away from what they considered these dangerous colonists who were rumored to be stockpiling weapons. They were. And they wanted to go in there and take them away because they couldn't harm people as much if they didn't have any weapons. So they encountered the colonials at Lexington, and then shots were fired. Now, these colonials are not trained soldiers. They're just people who are trying to protect their weapons. Okay? This becomes the first battle of the American Revolution. So notice I have that in capital letters because we need to know that. Now, while 73 redcoats died and another 200 plus were wounded, this made an impact on the British. They really thought they were just going to march right into Lexington and Concord, that they were going to take the colonists' weapons away, find their hiding places, and that was going to be the end of it. But in reality, the colonists knew they were coming and were ready for them. So this sort of alerted the British that the colonists weren't messing around. Questions on Lexington and Concord? Okay, next slide. Next battle, Bunker Hill. Bunker Hill, and I like this picture because it shows the British with their drums and their bright red uniforms marching up a hill. The Americans were on the top of the hill, which is a good spot to be when you are in battle because you can see them coming. The problem that they had, though, was that the Americans did not have very much ammunition. So they were warned not to fire until you see the whites of their eyes. The guns back then weren't very accurate. So if you just went shooting willy-nilly, you have to remember that one shot you'd have to shoot and then you'd have to go back reload, put powder in, and then shoot again. So it was time consuming. If you shot and you weren't anywhere near it, you just wasted a bullet. And now it's giving time for the other guys to march up on you as you are trying to reload. So if you waited until they got so close you could see the whites of their eyes, you had a better chance of actually hitting something or someone. Again, this is in the city of Boston, so notice everything, especially at the start, is happening near Boston. It's the second battle of the war. The British had to charge up the hill 3 times. Okay, so as you can see by the picture, again, I like this picture because it really shows there are dead bodies there. And then it's like, okay, just step over them on your way up the hill. It's hard to get there. It's hard to march up in a straight line up a hill. So while the Americans did lose because they lost all their ammunition. I mean, they had literally stuffed everything into their guns that they could possibly stuff into their guns. They ended up losing because they ran out of ammunition. But this was another point of showing that the Americans are not going to go down as easily as the British think they're going to. The British really think that this is going to be easy peasy and that it's not going to be a problem. Questions on Bunker Hill? Trenton, we could call the Christmas surprise. Washington crosses the Delaware River, and we analyzed that picture that was made many years later on the evening of December 25th to surprise the Hessians, who are the paid German mercenaries by the British, on the very early morning of December 26th. This is a very early victory for Washington, and it shows his creativity, that he's thinking about, we're not going to rest just because it's winter. We're not going to stop just because it's a holiday. We're going to anticipate what the Hessians are going to be doing the night before, and we're going to take advantage of them maybe not being in their best spot. So the Battle of Trenton really kind of sets up the idea again that Washington was a force to be reckoned with. He was very creative, he was very clever, and he was going to perhaps be the downfall of the British. So this was a clear win for Washington and his men. Trenton is in New Jersey. Questions on this one? Battle of Saratoga. Saratoga is in upstate New York. It is known as the, notice the bold letters, turning point of the war. Now, there are lots and lots and lots of battles in the American Revolution. We don't have time for all of those. If you want to know the details of all of these things, there are classes in high school that you can take. One of them is called AP US History, where you learn all of US history in 1 year. Okay, very detailed information. If you are interested more in the fine points of wars, there's literally a class called Wars that you can take. So we are not covering every battle that simply happened. We don't have time for that. So Saratoga is important because it's a turning point in the war. First of all, France agrees to help us, and we need their help. So they see that we're actually successful and might win because the French do not want to join the losing side. But the other important thing that this does is this stops the constant battles in the northern section. So New England, the Boston area, that area has now been soundly defeated of the British, okay? So the Americans are coming out on top, and now the New England or northern area is becoming more safe. And the British basically have lost that area. Okay, so turning point, France agrees to help us. No more threat to the northern section in New England. Okay, other questions? Cowpens. Okay, the main thing about Cowpens is that it was a false retreat. And I like this one because, again, this picture shows essentially what happens. Okay, the Americans are in the blue, the British are in the red. Okay, so they're hanging out here. The British or the Americans here shoot their 2 shots, look like they're retreating. They run away, they run away. This next group here then moves in. Okay, so it looks like they were totally running away, but there was really just a second wave waiting to sort of bombard them. So again, this one is important because it takes place in the south. So now we've moved down south where the loyalists are, so a bit more of a challenge. It was a sneak attack, and while the colonists still retreated, there were so many British that were killed, it was seen sort of as a victory for Americans, even though we ended up running away. Okay, Owen. Yes, they had guerrilla tactics, hit and run tactics, that they kind of did sneaky different things. Yes. Okay. Any question on Cowpens? False retreat. Okay, so here's a quick video on Cowpens to give you sort of a visual of this. So again, just kind of sit back, relax, and watch this.
Unable to destroy General George Washington's Continental Army in the early stages of the American Revolution, the British High Command decided to shift its strategy and focus on the southern colonies late in 1779. The Crown forces enjoyed initial success with twin victories at Charleston and Camden. But in the fall, the tide began to turn, with a Patriot victory at the Battle of Kings Mountain in October, and again in January 1781 at the Battle of Cowpens. In December 1780, Brigadier General Daniel Morgan was appointed to command a flying army which consisted of state troops, Continental regulars, and dragoons. His mission was to move into the backcountry of South Carolina and harass the British outpost. Determined to defeat Morgan, the British commander, Lord Charles Cornwallis, chose one of his top subordinates for the task, Lieutenant Colonel Banastre Tarleton. Tarleton had established a fearsome reputation for his aggressive tactics on the battlefield. Tarleton caught up with Morgan below the Broad River in South Carolina on the morning of January 17, 1781. This open rolling meadow was used by locals to herd their cattle before driving them to market and was known as the Cowpens. The terrain was perfectly suited to Morgan's battle plan. He decided to form his men into 3 lines. The first consisted of riflemen from Georgia and South Carolina. Behind that, he formed his militia. The idea, later known as the defense in depth, was to exhaust the British advance and inflict as many casualties as possible before the British reached the third and final line, consisting of Continental regulars. There, Morgan hoped to deal a decisive blow to Tarleton. The fighting began before first light on January 17, 1781, when Morgan's riflemen encountered the British vanguard. Tarleton quickly shook out a battle line, with his infantry in the center and his cavalry guarding each flank. The riflemen slowed Tarleton's advance before withdrawing back to the militia line. There, the militia fired 2 volleys and then withdrew to Morgan's third line. Tarleton was advancing into Morgan's trap. When Tarleton's advance reached the third line, it was quickly brought to a halt by the Continental regulars. Tarleton decided to bring up his reserves in an attempt to flank the American position. To meet this maneuver, the Continentals faced about and withdrew calmly as if they were on the parade ground. Morgan, watching from the rear in horror, thought that his line had broken and rode up and down the line, exhorting his men to face about, boys, give them one good volley and the victory is ours. The Continentals wheeled about and delivered a withering volley into the British ranks. Morgan ordered a bayonet charge, with his infantry bearing down on Tarleton's front and the militia and cavalry swinging around on the flanks. Known as a double envelopment, Morgan's counterattack swallowed up Tarleton's force, and the British retreated in a rout from the field. "I gave him a devil of a whipping," Morgan wrote several days later. Indeed, Morgan's victory helped boost American morale, inflicted casualties that Cornwallis could not replace, and set off a string of events that would end 9 months later with the British surrender at Yorktown.
Okay. All right. Start again. Let's just stop that. There we go. Okay, so that just gave you a little idea about cow pens. Okay, so the next one is the Battle of Yorktown. I didn't skip any, did I? Okay, so this is sort of the, as he was saying, this is sort of the final ending battle. It's the final defeat of the British. So this is wrapping up and ending the war. Okay, the British General Cornwallis ends up surrendering, and the French Navy surrounds them by sea, and we locked them up inland in Virginia. And so they couldn't get out. So they couldn't back up onto land further because we blocked them out. And then the French Navy was floating around in the water, so they couldn't escape that way. So they were basically kind of stuck there. All right. So Yorktown is important to understand that once General Cornwallis surrenders, of course, fighting still continues because they have no, it takes forever for news to get from place to place. But what happens is this is essentially when the British are saying, okay, fine, we get it, you won, okay? So it takes time before they get to the Treaty of Paris and things like that. But this is basically the final decisive battle between the two groups. So we started watching it, but we didn't necessarily finish the Battle of Yorktown song and from Hamilton. And so we're going to watch this part very briefly. And again, it has the music. Would it be better with the lights off? Okay, so Lucas, could you get the lights, please?
The Battle of Yorktown, 1781.
Monsieur Hamilton,
Monsieur Lafayette,
in command where you belong.
are you saying no sweat? We're finally on the field. We've had quite a run.
Immigrants, we get the job done.
So what are you doing?
I go back to France, I bring freedom to my people if I'm given the chance.
We'll be with you when you do.
Go, lead your men.
See you on the other side.
Here we meet again.
I am not thrown away, ma, shot. I am not thrown away, ma, shot. Hey, I'm just like my country. I'm young, scrappy, and hungry, and I'm not thrown away, ma, shot. I am not thrown away, ma, shot.
Till the world turns upside down.
Till the world turns upside down.
I imagine death so much it feels more like a memory. This is where it gets me. On my feet, the enemy ahead of me. If this is the end of me, at least I have a friend with me. Weapon in my hand, a command of my men with me. Then I remember my Eliza's expecting me. Not only that, my Eliza's expecting. We gotta go, gotta get the job done. Gotta start a new nation, gotta meet my son. Take the bullets out your gun, the bullets out your gun. We move undercover and we move as one. Through the night we have one shot to live another day. We cannot let a stray gunshot give us away. We will fight up close, seize the moment and stay in it. It's either that or meet the business end of a bayonet. Code words, Rochambeau, dig me. You have your orders now, go man, go. So the American experiment begins with my friends all scattered to the winds. Lawrence is in South Carolina, redefining bravery. We'll never be free until we end slavery. When we finally drop the British away, Lafayette is there waiting in Chesapeake Bay. How did we know that this plan would work? We had a spy on the inside, that's right.
I was spying on the British government. I take the measurements, information, and then I smuggle it to my brother's revolutionary covenant. I'm running with the sons of liberty, and I am loving it. See, that's what happens when you up against the ruffians. We in the Chanel, somebody's gotta shuffle it. Hercules Mulligan, I need no introduction. When you knock me down, I get the shoot back up.
redcoat stands on a parapet.
We lower our guns as he frantically waves their white handkerchief.
And just like that, it's over. We tend to our wounded, we count our dead.
Black and white soldiers wonder alike if this really means freedom.
Not yet.
We negotiate the terms of surrender. I see George Washington smile. We escort the men out of Yorktown. They stagger home single file. Tens of thousands of people flood the streets. There are screams and church bells ringing. And as our fallen foes retreat, I hear the drinking song they're singing.
Okay, so again, I like that one simply because it shows you also that the crowd is no longer laughing at the idea of a musical about Hamilton. They're clearly quite into it now. So Yorktown kind of wraps everything up as far as the serious fighting with them officially surrendering. No. Next one. Okay. Now, this is Schoolhouse Rock. We watched this before, okay? The shot heard around the world, but we watched it when we talked about Lexington and Concord. I want you to watch it now and see which battles they're talking about, because they're very specifically going to talk about multiple battles. So let's see. First, they're going to show us a nice commercial.
Road trip rocks, 55 surprises to unbound beds. Snack cafe, clamp it up, 2-story slide away. Light up pool, hit the runway. LOL surprise 2-in-1 glamper. Over 55
I mean, it could have
surprises,
been worse,
exclusive
I
doll,
guess.
underdoll, sold separate
All
for
right.
batteries and smart device not included.
Okay, here we go.
As your body grows bigger,
Your mind must flower,
it's great to learn.
cause knowledge is power.
It's Schoolhouse Rocky, the chip off the block of your favorite Schoolhouse Rock. How would you like to hear the shot heard round the world?
The British are coming, the British are coming.
Who is that?
Now the ride of Paul Revere set the nation on its ear, and the shot at Lexington heard round the world. When the British fired in the early dawn, the War of Independence had begun. The die was cast, the rebel flag unfurled, and on to Concord marched the foe to seize the arsenal there, you know, waking folks and searching all around. Till our militia stopped them in their tracks. At the old North Bridge, we turned them back and chased those redcoats back to Boston town. And the shot heard round the world was the start of the revolution. The Minutemen were ready on the move. Take your powder, take your gun, report to General Washington. Hurry men, there's not an hour to lose. Now at famous Bunker Hill, even though we lost, it was quite a thrill. The rebel Colonel Prescott proved he was wise. Outnumbered and low on ammunition as the British stormed his position, he said, hold your fire till you see the whites of their eyes. Though the next few years were rough, General Washington's men proved they were tough. Those hungry, ragged boys would not be beat. One night they crossed the Delaware, surprised the Hessians in their lair, and at Valley Forge they just bundled up their feet. Now the shot heard round the world was the start of the revolution. The Minutemen were ready on the move. Take your blanket, take your sun, report to General Washington. We've got our rights and now it's time to prove. Well, they showed such determination that they won the admiration of countries across the sea like France and Spain, who loaned the colony ships and guns and put the British on the run and the Continental Army on its feet again. And though they lost some battles too, the Americans swore they see it through. Their raiding parties kept up hit and run. At Yorktown, the British could not retreat, bottled up by Washington and the French fleet. Cornwallis surrendered, and finally we had won. Hooray! From the shot heard round the world to the end of the revolution, the Continental rabble took the day, and the father of our country beat the British there at Yorktown and brought freedom to you and me and the USA. God bless America. Let freedom ring.
And of course, it's from Disney Education, of course. All right.
As your body grows bigger.
I don't want to watch it again. All right, so hopefully you identified some
your
of the
body grows
battles in that
bigger.
one, and you could see some of the things that they talked about, you know, the hit and run tactics, the Battle of Bunker Hill, Yorktown, and how the British got locked in there by the French fleet and Washington. All right, so question number 2. The Boston Tea Party and how the British reacted. Well, it's the Sons of Liberty who actually do this. It's a group of patriots or rebels who dressed up as Mohawk Indians, although everybody knew it wasn't Mohawk Indians doing it, and dumped the British tea at night. Okay, so this happens at night. They're kind of trying to do it stealthy like, but not really. So it's held right in the Boston Harbor. And of course, it's to protest the tea tax. Now, what confuses a lot of students is that the tea tax did not raise the price of tea. It lowered the price of tea. Okay. But they had to buy it from the British East India Company. So they were still paying the tax. They weren't buying smuggled tea anymore from their neighbors. They had to purchase this from Britain's tea company. Okay. And so they were upset about that. And that is why they dumped the tea, because they didn't want to purchase it. And so they were afraid that if it was available and they were told people just to boycott it, that probably wasn't going to happen because people love their tea. So if they dumped the tea that nobody could use except for the fishies, they were going to have no tea to sell. And so financially, that was going to hurt them. Now, how did the British respond to the Americans dumping the tea? Well, they enacted the Intolerable Acts. Okay, and the Intolerable Act said this: that's it, you're grounded. The Boston Harbor is closed until you pay back all of that tea you just wasted. Okay, so the Intolerable Acts were a tough punishment. They took away power from local representatives. So remember, they were used to sort of running their own show, having their own crimes and punishments, determining what was being taxed. And now that power was completely taken away. And the British were now watching every move that the colonists were making in that area. The colonial soldiers went back to England for any trials for crimes that they may have committed, so that they wouldn't have what they felt was a biased group making decisions. So all colonial soldiers, like the British soldiers, went back to England, and that's where they would be tried. The Quartering Act was reenacted. Okay, it had kind of come and gone, but now they add part 2 of the Quartering Act, which essentially says, okay, you need to house the soldiers. And now it's kind of for twofold. Now you need to make sure that they are there in the house and you are taking care of them. But now it is also saying this way they can keep an eye on things. Okay? So again, all of us should be either looking up at my board or should be looking at their notes, not on a game or a video right now. Okay, so that was what happened after the Boston Tea Party. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, so number 3, what do these mean? Loyalist and Tory are pretty much the same thing. Tory is like the political party, And loyalists are the people who want to remain loyal to the king. They don't want to break away from England. Okay, they want to stay British colonists. They don't want to do that. They tended to be more in the South. People like government workers, people who worked for the British, those who were already wealthy. So why upset the apple cart? Okay, and they also, remember we talked about, they didn't want to cause bloodshed and destroy the towns that they had built up. They felt that it was not necessary for that to happen. Okay, they believed the colonists were out of control and that their friends and neighbors were not behaving themselves and that the British had every right to come in and crack down. So the loyalists sided very much with the king and parliament and not their neighbors. Owen. They'll eventually become the Federalists, but that doesn't come till later. Tories are people in England. So they're Tories in England. Okay, so one of the most famous examples that we know of is Peggy Shippen. Peggy Shippen is the one who marries Benedict Arnold and basically convinces him to switch sides. Okay, and so there's a picture of Peggy Shippen to give you that idea. All right, a patriot and a rebel, those people want to break away from England, so they rebelled. Hence the idea of being a rebel. You listening, Sam? Okay, they dumped the tea, they boycotted products and refused to buy them, they attacked soldiers. Okay, government officials or tax collectors were not exactly their friends. Okay, so oftentimes they would do things like tar and feather them. They would pour hot tar on them, okay, and then stick feathers on them. This could kill someone, if not seriously damage their skin and harm them. But again, this is a way to make them sort of look like a chicken and to shame them and embarrass them. So there's a picture there of them essentially tarring and feathering someone. And so the patriots, you know, came after the government officials. You want to collect my taxes? Then we're going to attack you. Okay, so while the tax collector may be making good money and is very happy with the British, it's tough to live there. Your neighbors are not going to like you very much. So the patriots are ones that are causing the chaos. All right. Number 4, you talked about Ben Franklin's political cartoon, Join or Die. First of all, we need to know that Ben Franklin created that, but he did not create it for the American Revolution. He originally created it for the French and Indian War, saying that they needed to come together to help the British to fight the French. Then they turned around and used it for the American Revolution, saying, guys, now we need to come together to fight the British. So it's stressing unity and the idea of separated, we're not going to be as strong. Now notice that Ben Franklin puts the New England, NE, the New England colonies, as the head of the snake, because that's kind of the most important area, because that's where the rebelling is starting. The Boston Tea Party, the Boston Massacre, a lot of those first battles, Lexington and Concord, those were done in the New England area. So he's stressing unity, but showing that New England is sort of taking the lead by being the snake's head. And so he's sort of showing that we need to sort of follow behind. Okay, so New England, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. Notice it does not have all 13 colonies. Poor Georgia has been left out. All right, questions on Join or Die? Okay, Common Sense, of course, was written by Thomas Paine. And he basically wrote this long pamphlet that said, okay, we've tried boycotting, we've tried sending strongly worded letters, you know, we've tried to make a difference, nothing is changing. So now he's saying, colonists, I think it's just time that we're done with England. It's time to separate. Okay, he's wanting independence and he wants to convince more people to become patriots and break away. So Common Sense is simply a pamphlet to try to convince people that it's time for a breakup. Okay, so Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine, time to separate. Good to go on that? Are we still typing? Okay. Again, we don't need word for word, but just so that you get the main idea here. Okay, next part. Number 6, Paul Revere's engraving. We spent multiple days studying this and looking at this. So it is engraving showing the Boston Massacre where 5 colonists were killed. Remember, 5 colonists were killed, not 500. It was entitled The Bloody Massacre, okay, that occurred on King Street in Boston. It is not a 100% accurate painting of what happened. Paul Revere used this, entitled this, based on what he wanted to convince others to see. The engraving is a piece of propaganda that when others, even if you can't read, see this, you see the bright red uniform standing in a line, the innocent colonists doing absolutely nothing to bring this on, and clearly the British are the bad guys. Now, much of it was inaccurate. They're showing no snowballs thrown. They're showing that, you know, the British look determined and angry, which in reality, they may have been extremely scared for the large crowd. So it is not completely correct, okay, but it is used to convince people of the British and their wrongdoings. All right, we've talked about that a lot, so I hope that's something that you were familiar with. Okay, number 7, Abigail Adams. Quote, remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Unquote, Abigail Adams. Okay, Abigail Adams was not typical for her day. She was extremely educated and she was very involved in politics, which back in that time was considered very unusual. She ended up marrying John Adams. He became the 2nd president of the United States. He was Washington's vice president. And she is the mother of John Quincy Adams, who was the 6th president of the United States. So she is the mother and wife of 2 presidents. Okay. She fought for women's rights and against slavery. She wanted women to be able to speak up more and felt that, you know, women are going to start rebelling and women are going to start causing problems, which happens about 100 years later, if they weren't included in decisions in government and couldn't hold political decisions and couldn't vote. Women's right to vote did not happen nationwide until 1920. Okay, so we're talking she was around in the early 1800s, and she's saying women need to have a say in things. They need to be able to vote and be involved in politics. Okay, so we add on 100 years later that they finally get the right to vote. Tack on another 100 years before a woman is elected to the spot of vice president. Okay, so she's like 200 years ahead of her time. All right, she feels that education and reading are extremely important. Okay, she believes that for her children as well, and so they are also well educated. Okay, number 8, the Stamp Act. It taxed things like legal documents, books and pamphlets, playing cards, dice, newspaper. But remember, it wasn't the Stamp Act tax itself that bothered them. Okay, so I have to pay a little bit more for a book than I would have otherwise. I have to pay a tax. That's not what's bothering them. What's bothering them is that nobody asked them. Nobody said, hey, we need to raise money. So what should we put a tax on? Okay, they were just simply told it wasn't your choice, but here's what you're going to get taxed on. So it wasn't that the tax made them pay so much more, but more that they were just not involved in the passing of the law and the decision about what was going to be taxed. Okay? It's kind of like the idea of cleaning your room. When you look at your room and say, wow, this is really a mess. I really need to clean this up because it's starting to stink in here. Okay? Then you're all for cleaning your room. But your room could look just as bad or 10 times worse. And your mom walks by and says, you need to clean your room. And then you feel absolutely no reason to clean it, right? Yeah, I don't need to clean it. There's nothing wrong with it because you're not making the decision. So when you're making the decision about something, it's much easier to tolerate it. They weren't being asked, okay, about it. They didn't make the decision to put the tax on these things. The mother country said, you now have to do it. And that's what's bothering them. Okay, the Quartering Act. Many of you did your projects on the Quartering Act, so many of you are very familiar with that. So the soldiers had no place to live, okay? The British kept sending over more and more soldiers to deal with our naughty behavior. The problem was they had no place to put them. So they came up with this Quartering Act that demanded the people in the colonies come up with a place for the soldiers to stay and must give them at least some sort of sustenance to eat. Gotta feed them. Now, while the colonists did provide those things, they didn't necessarily do it in a very willing or happy manner. But it was something that they were forced to do. Okay, so we talked about that oftentimes they would, find some space in their house, but that they didn't necessarily find the nicest space and the nicest food for them. But they had to comply because that was the law. Otherwise, they could be arrested. So I like this picture here. You can see the soldiers in the red, and they're basically got their weapons there. They're going through all the stuff. While the poorer people in the house are like, what are you doing? No, stop taking that. Don't go through that. Okay, they're knocking chairs over. So they did, neither group was very happy with this situation. So the soldiers oftentimes were not very polite themselves and came in and just sort of barreled in and took over the house. I mean, if you're a woman with children while your husband is off working and 3-4 men with weapons come in your house, you don't really have much choice. So if they start taking your food and killing your chickens to eat and, doing all that kind of stuff, you just got to stay out of the way. And so this gives you an idea that both sides were probably not very tolerant of this. All right, the Declaration of Independence. Number 10, we're almost done. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Again, this is written mostly by Thomas Jefferson as sort of a breakup letter to the British king. He did not come up with the words life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. John Locke came up with life, liberty, and property. Jefferson tweaked it a little bit. So remember, Jefferson writes this. Okay, now this is a Schoolhouse Rock on Declaration of Independence. We have not seen this one before, so sit back and enjoy.
Rainbow High! Shade, rebel, daring type. Skylar, sweet, classic twist.
Obviously,
Violet, diva, bling, can't miss. Rainbow High, dolls with 2 outfits, each sold separately.
2 outfits. All right, here we go.
Ooh, there's gonna be fireworks on the 4th of July. Red, white, and blue fireworks like diamonds in the sky. We're gonna shoot the entire works on fireworks that really show, oh yeah, we declared our liberty 200 years ago. In 1776, there were fireworks too. The original colonists, their tempers blew. Like Thomas Paine once wrote, it's only common sense that if a government won't give you your basic rights, you better get another government. And though some people tried to fight it, well, a committee was formed to write it. Benjamin Franklin, Philip Livingston, John Adams, Roger Sherman, Thomas Jefferson, they got it done. The Declaration, the Declaration of Independence in 1776. The Continental Congress said that we were free. Said we had had the right of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Ooh, when England heard the news, they blew their stack. But the colonists lit the fuse, there'd be no turning back. They'd had enough of injustice now, but even if it really hurts, oh yeah, if you don't give us our freedom now, you're gonna see some fireworks. And on the 4th of July they signed it, and 56 names underlined it. And now to honor those first 13 states, we turn the sky into a birthday cake. They got it done. The Declaration of Independence in 1776. Continental Congress said that we were free. Said we had the right of life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness.
We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And if there's one thing that makes me happy, then you know that it's there's gonna be fireworks.
Okay, so just to give you an idea of these Schoolhouse Rocks were made when I was a kid in the 70s, and they were played in between cartoons. So you'd have commercials and then you'd have these, and so you'd watch these. So that's why you have the perhaps not very politically correct man chasing woman as pursuit of happiness, because this was made a long time ago. Okay, so just so you get the idea, but otherwise they kind of stand the test of time. All right, the next part then. Okay, remember we talked about unalienable rights are those that are given to you at birth and cannot be taken away. Okay, so things like choosing your own religion or not being religious at all. Remember that Jefferson used the word creator. He did not use the word God. Jefferson was anti-religion. He did not believe in religion. So he didn't want to use the word God, but he felt like people could be religious if they wanted to, or like him, you could choose not to be religious. Now remember, he lives in Virginia, so he does not live by the Puritans who are going to punish you for not going to church. But this is still kind of unheard of, that you had people who were thinking more about science and less about religion. So Jefferson was a little bit different in his thinking. So again, unalienable rights can't be taken away, rights that you are given, like choices that you want to make. All right, next one. A lot of the Declaration of Independence was the complaints or grievances, so you know what that word means, about King George III. Okay, they spent a lot of time complaining and grumbling about all the bad things that he did. So just to highlight a few of them, he put taxes on us without asking. Okay, that again, just like we talked about with the Stamp Act, that upset them. He increased the troops. He hired mercenaries and made us house them because he needed so many people here to fight us. Okay, they felt he had unfair trials. He didn't respect the colonies, and he was not willing to work with us. He was simply going to boss us around. So remember, the colonies were very used to their hands-off policy of before, where the British just kind of let us make our own rules. As long as we had the raw materials to provide them, they were fine. But then the French and Indian War came along, and we went into some deep debt, the British did. And so they needed money. And so they thought, you know what? We're going to tax the colonists. The colonists were getting taxed much less than the British people. The colonies had this hands-off policy they were used to, and suddenly they were being told, nope, this is going to be your form of government. This is going to be the governor who's going to run your colony. this is how things are going to be, and they didn't like that idea. Okay, so because of that and the Declaration of Independence, we wanted no more kings. Again with the LOL. 55 surprises. Sorry everybody for making you watch these.
LOL Surprise 2-in-1 Glamper. Over 55 surprises and exclusive dolls. Other dolls sold separately. Batteries and smart device not included.
All right, here we go.
Rocking and a rolling, smishing and a splashing over the horizon. What can it be? The pilgrims sailed the sea to find a place to call their own. In their ship Mayflower, they hope to find a better home. They finally knocked on Plymouth Rock, and someone said, "We're there." It may not look like home, but at this point I don't care. Oh, they were missing Mother England. They swore their loyalty until the very end. Anything you say, King, it's okay, King. You know it's kind of scary on your own. Gonna build a new land the way we planned. Could you help us run it till it's grown? They planted corn, you know, they built their houses one by one. And bit by bit they worked until the colonies were done. They looked around, yeah, up and down, and someone said, "Hooray!" If the king could only see us now, he would be proud of us today. They knew that now they'd run their own land. But George III still vowed he'd rule them to the end. Anything I say, do it my way now. Anything I say, do it my way. Don't you get to feeling independent, 'cause I'm gonna force you to obey. He taxed their property, he didn't give them any choice. And back in England, he didn't give them any voice. That's called taxation without representation, and it's not fair. But when the colonies complained, the king said, "I don't care." He even has the nerve to tax our cup of tea. To put it kindly, King, we really don't agree. Gonna show you how we feel. We're gonna dump this tea and turn this harbor into the biggest cup of tea in history. They wanted no more Mother England. They knew the time had come for them to take command. It's very clear you're being unfair, King. No matter what you say, we won't obey. Gonna hold a revolution now, King, and we're gonna run it all away with no more king.
We're gonna elect a president.
No more king.
He's gonna do what the people want.
No more king.
We're gonna run things our way.
No more king.
Nobody's gonna tell us what to do.
Rocking and a rolling, swishing and a splashing over the horizon. What can it be? Looks like it's going to be
A free country.
All right, so I'm glad you liked it. All right, the number 11, we're closing in on the end here. So what advantages did we have? So the Americans had some advantages. First of all, we had a reason to fight. We wanted freedom from England. And so breaking away was sort of a passion that we had and a reason to break away. Okay, we were at home, so the land was sort of known to us and we could utilize it better for the hit and run tactics. We knew what areas to hide in. We knew where there were hills to overlook things, etc. We eventually, after Saratoga, had the French to sort of help us out and make sure that we, had the supplies, had enough soldiers, and of course they brought a navy, which we didn't really have. John Paul Jones tried, but it was better there. Okay, we were closer to home. We had some local access to some merchants who were willing to help the cause. And of course, one of our biggest advantages was George Washington. Okay, he was very smart. He was a great leader, and that really helped us to win some important battles. And so that in itself was an extremely important advantage. All right. They, on the other hand, had some advantages as well. They had very well-trained troops with uniforms that actually, fit them and kept them warm. They had more money and ammunitions to buy, and they had factories where they could make ammunition. We didn't necessarily have that set up. They were able to buy, while the Americans were able to buy food from locals, oftentimes the British would sell it to them for the British pounds, because the British pounds is actually worth something. So the British could buy food more easily because they actually had money that was worth something. They also had the help of many loyalists who could help provide things for them, and they had a strong navy. They also had enough money to hire the mercenaries and actually pay another country's soldiers to come over and to help them. Okay? So you're going to need to use this study guide to help you go through. I gave you some key ideas. I gave you some things to sort of make sure that you understood everything, but hopefully all of this made sense now so that you understand the concepts. Okay, are there any questions? Anybody at home have any questions? Okay, so you've got the Kahoot. Hopefully that gave you some review to understand the Quizlet. Go through it to keep practicing that information and use your study guide to review. Look back at the other worksheets and things like that. Try to go over the different content so that it's not something that's totally foreign to you, okay? Do any of the videos that you saw today, do you need any of those on Canvas so that you can access them? I think we saw them, that was enough, right? Okay, so tomorrow, okay. I need you to listen. So tomorrow is going to be the test. We will do a very brief review, but there are 29 questions on there, and it is worth 4 large summative grades. So here's what I need you to understand. Not every question is going to be like a Kahoot question. It's not going to be, what is a loyalist? Okay, it's going to be more like, it's going to give a passage, and then it's going to ask you, do you think this was written by a loyalist or a patriot? So you need to know what a loyalist is and what a patriot is in order to identify who would have talked about these things. So it's going to have more sort of reading, and the answers are going to maybe be longer, like some of them were on some of the Kahoots. So you really need to take your time and do your best, okay? So make sure you're doing that. All right, are there any questions about the test before I go over missing work?